Well, hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now finally the final top 10 class ranking video, and again arguably the hardest one to make just because there are so many great champions. So we have covered all 5 classes but mutant, which is what we're going to do now. We have covered 2021 champions and 2021 buffs. After this video, we're going to be releasing top 15 champions in the game, in my opinion, and then we're going to have a tier list update and perhaps another small surprise video for you guys. As a standard disclaimer, with this video, I am stating it as a fact which champions are better than others. I am trying to insult your intelligence, and I am trying to pick a fight with your ancestors. Therefore, duel at sunrise is a possibility, or in comment section, pick your weapons, I'll meet you there. No, but if you're serious, then obviously this is just my opinion, and that is just that. And obviously my opinion is affected by my own personal experiences, by information I have been subjected to, by impressions that, champions have left on me. We do not have any official statistics or data to go off here, like the most used champions in a class, just champions with highest success rate and things like that. Therefore, with that in mind, keep an open mind. If you think differently, that's good. That's the entire point of these videos, Sometimes your placements will match mine, and often they won't. And that's no reason to fight. It's a reason to discuss and think. Either way, let's get to it, shall we then? Now with Mutant Class is also the second biggest class in the game, and there's a ton of good champions. There's just no way around it. There's plenty of high quality champions that would likely make it to the top 10 lists in several of the other classes. Like Storm Pyramid X is a wonderful, amazing champion that unfortunately does not quite make it up here to top 10. Then we have champions like Sabertooth who have their value. We have champions like, Iceman. Havoc unfortunately didn't make the list. I'm personally a big fan of Havoc. And Bishop doesn't make the list, even though I really do enjoy Bishop and I think he is a great champion and has his uses, so on and so forth. Domino is fan favorite by many, so is Emma Frost. Fortunately, Mutant Class is just that competitive. So let's start with spot number 10, and in spot number 10 I am placing White Magneto right about now, because White Magneto is an amazing champion in his own right. I do still think he is sitting in the shadow of his more successful counterpart, and still we see this guy very popular in the game. Granted, not as many people actually rank up and use the champion, even though I have seen an increasing number of players who have ranked up that Magneto finally and are starting to realize that, hey, often enough, I don't need to have Red Magneto. White Magneto will get the job done. And sometimes it's even better to have White Magneto because he does have more active playstyle. But realistically, in most of the fights, if you are going up against the metal champion, Red Magneto will do better. White Magneto actually does better against non-metal champions. But on top of everything else this champion is and does and represents, he has one of the most useful pre-fight abilities in the game that you can apply up to 3 times in any given quest without having to fight with White Magneto himself. And you just you give your champions increased attack rating, and on top of that, you basically give them passive stun, which is a massive ability considering the increasing amount of nodes and champion abilities with these purification effects. And quite frequently now, especially like in Act 7.3, we could notice the point of, you can't really parry that boss, bring in White Magneto, and all of a sudden your problems are solved. It works extremely well in Alliance War. We have seen this also used on occasion in Alliance Quest, especially in Map 7, previously before we switched up to Map 8. And yeah, it just works extremely well. On top of that, he has a synergy with himself that gives further benefits to metal and hero champions. And then he's a synergy partner with some awesome champions as well, like Professor X and so on and so forth, and Guardian and Colossus and Apocalypse, and on we go with Cable as well, who has become a very influential mutant champion. So he is incredibly good support character, but unlike champions, let's say like Heimdall, he also has very high potency to actually get the fights done himself. So there we go. I put him in spot number 10 for now. Again, that could shift at some point in the future. Spot number 9, a champion that people love to hate and have love-hate relationship, and it's Namor. And on somewhat of a more serious note, I think Namor is making a tiny bit of a comeback in competitive content, because we are seeing more and more champions and abilities that do inflict damage on you. And he actually turns out that he can counter, decent portion of them. To a degree, he can even be a relatively successful Kitty Pryde counter, where you don't necessarily need to worry about as much as with other champions about Kitty Pryde auto-blocking you and dealing you a lot of direct damage by power draining you, because you can throw that damage back at Kitty Pryde. And then when you enter your super mega rage mode, your special 2s are unblockable and they can get through the block as well. But on top of that, we have seen the return of several different taunts nodes or abilities alike. And I personally can say that I have somewhat increased his use compared to, previous year overall. That being said, he is not everybody's cup of tea. Obviously, everybody has, fair amount of grievances with the champion. I'm definitely not a fan of how his damage is distributed and how it comes with these big lumps, and he's somewhat, let's say, moderate and or underwhelming champion even in his like base hits and base special attacks. It's only when you really get that special 3 Fury going, then you can like blitz out some very, very big fights. But obviously, his signature ability is where the value is at. Now, luckily, we are in the point in the game where if you don't have Namor, it's fine. More often than not, you can find alternate solutions. So I can see why some people try to avoid him. But having him does make things easier somewhat frequently. And obviously, just the fact that Namor is still one of the top 5 prestige champions kind of make him more present than perhaps he otherwise would have been. If Namor wouldn't have as high prestige as he does have, he would not be as used, because less people would choose to invest 200 signature stones in the champion, which is absolutely mandatory to get the maximum benefit. But just because he is the prestige champion, you cannot, or rather should not, overlook his potential in his own right. And therefore, that is the reason he's at spot number 9. We can obviously debate that we perhaps should replace Namor with, I don't know, Bishop or Sunspot, which did not unfortunately make the list either. But I do think that there is more value in having Namor, for instance, than Sunspot. Oh, one mention, champion that did not make the top 10 list is Strife. And I wanted to actually specifically mention Strife because, yeah, if you do need to do like Abyss or Labyrinth, then there is a good argument for you ranking up Strife. I do not think that Strife is kind of potent, good enough, or, used enough in day-to-day stuff. But in this ranking list, just like in the previous one with skill class, I lowered Aegon's placement just to make a point that Aegon is still an incredible champion, even if you have done Abyss, because there are plenty of use for Aegon, Act 6, Act 7, and other areas of the game. With Strife, I haven't seen it as much, therefore he is not on this list. Now you can go to comment section to complain. Right, either way, let's go on to spot number 8, and spot number 8 is going to be Omega Red. Omega Red is another mutant champion that has to be SIG 200, which unfortunately does not come with the super high prestige. And I think that's one of the reasons why we haven't seen as many Omega Reds ranked up. But that there is more to it. There's quite a lot more to it. Because Omega Red doesn't quite fit the game the same way he used to a couple of years ago. And everything that people used Omega Red, people have switched over to. If it's a metal champion, it's Magneto. Sometimes it's Archangel, sometimes it's Kitty Pryde, sometimes something else. But everything that Omega was used for, there are other as if not more effective options that people find easier to use. I also think that the champion design itself has been hurting Omega Red. And by that I mean champions with, more elaborate animations, more distance placing special attacks, and longer special attack animations. Therefore, by definition, it is harder to keep spores up on, I don't know, be that Iron Man Infinity War, or be that Psycho Man, or be that Super Scroll with his, special attacks, than it is to against Captain Marvel movie, for instance. Than it is against, I don't know, Scarlet Witch or whoever. The older champions typically had shorter special animations that made it relatively easy to stay nearby, get back in there very quickly without having, a significant amount of spore drop off if you hadn't locked them in with a heavy attack. And that's becoming harder and harder to use. And with the increase in health pools, it's harder to finish out the fight with that first initial death field active and the spores that you have accumulated from it. On top of that, Omega Red is also a fairly unique mutant in the sense that he doesn't fit the underlying qualities of the mutant class as well. And by that I mean is that there's hardly any, I don't know, mutant CAV-EQ node where, you should definitely be using Omega Red. Because even if you manage to benefit from those nodes, Omega Red's spore damage does not increase with any artificial attack modifiers. The death spore damage scales with his base attack and base attack only, so even if you get 100 or 200% attack increase, the benefit from having that attack increase on Omega Red is significantly smaller than it is on virtually any other mutant champion. And similar thing goes to prowess, in case you get like some extra special attack damage, because that's not necessarily where Omega Red damage comes. So, whilst it worked out for a significant amount of time for Omega Red to be as different as he is from the rest of the mutant class, I think right now, as Kabam is kind of stereotyping these class types more and more, Omega Red is kind of suffering from it as well. And that's just one of those situations where the trends of the game slowly fade out the champion. The last bastion where Omega Red was still extremely dominant used to be Alliance War. But it's not even so much there anymore because, again, the fights that Omega Red used to take largely got replaced by other champions. And on top of that, now with high ground, his degeneration is more of a negative than positive on the heavy attack, which, can make it punishing to lock in the spores. So there always seem to have been some sort of obstacle that kind of like shifts Omega Red slower and slower. That is not to say that he's still not a fantastic champion. He is. He can do a ton of fights and he can be useful and he can clear a lot of content. And if you like Omega Red, all the power to you. I'm sure you're getting a lot of benefit out of using Omega Red. But at the same time, I think it is undeniable fact. If you look around at the content that has been released over the last 6 months or last year, that he's a lot less present. He's a lot less recommended by content creators. He's a lot less showcased by content creators. Be that War, be that Act 7, and stuff like that. And didn't have like any significant presence in, I don't know, Summer of Pain, Grandmaster's Gauntlet, or any of that stuff. Just one of those champions where all the trends of the game, I think, are kind of standing in his way little by little, and it all starts adding up. And I was actually struggling to decide whether to place Omega Red 8th or 7th, because the next champion decline is very similar to it. And it kind of pains me, because there was a point where I genuinely believed that he's the best mutant in the game, because the game just seemed to fit everything that Colossus did. Act 6.234, Colossus was at the top of the world. He could just beast through so many nodes with those incredible yellow numbers, with those immunities and everything else that he had to offer. And his main synergy partner was Omega Red. And Omega Red was still very much more relevant than he is right now. And I think these two have kind of moved down in a pair, so to speak. And with Colossus, I still value him more than Omega Red, because he still has in his own base kit, more immunities. He still has, more customization available to you. He's still tankier. But I cannot ignore the fact that you just don't really need him or even necessarily want to be using him above some of the top mutant options. Colossus doesn't necessarily have the problem where he doesn't fit the mutant class narrative, because he does benefit from all of those artificial attack increase. He does benefit from plenty of the mutant nodes because of either his armor ups or his immunity or whatever else. But again, he just doesn't feel as needed in Act 7. Now, I have used him in Act 7, and you can, but it's just when I was reaching for him in Act 6, I was confident that that is pretty much the best option. Now in Act 7, it doesn't much feel like it, you know? And obviously, he's still a phenomenal champion with phenomenal damage output. I think I still have a live stream where a 4-star Colossus did an entire path of Labyrinth of Legends, like 7 revives or something. You know, he can be bonkers. It's just that his role in the game is diminishing. And, you know, I did genuinely believe that he was one of the best, easily top 3 mutant at the peak of his presence. Amazing buff. But even I can't deny that, you know, even for me, his usage has declined. Still love him, still great champion. It's just, it's not quite as needed at the moment. So unfortunately, Colossus gets spot number 7. Let's move on to spot number 6. And I already can hear comments about how this champion is undeserving of spot number 6 because he relies on synergy. Well, 9 times out of 10, I'd agree with you. You know, a champion that's almost always dependent, not in Cable's case, always dependent on synergy, you know, perhaps shouldn't be as high. But then again, you know, Omega Red almost always ends up being used with Sabertooth synergy in any kind of significant setting, or Colossus largely gets used with Omega Red synergy. Similarly, Ultron almost always gets used with Hulkbuster synergy. I know that those almost quite mitigated, because even without the synergies, they have more power than Cable does. But with all the synergy pairs, I think Cable and Apocalypse go together pretty much the best. Because once they are together, both of them are extremely powerful champions. You do not feel that you're bringing in a champion for synergy's sake. When you bring in Cable, when you bring in Apocalypse, obviously Cable makes Apocalypse much more viable because there is no ramp up anymore. You automatically start with the 4 charges, and Apocalypse does wonders to Cable. And they also work well in pairs in regards of what fights each can handle. And there will be fights where you genuinely want to use Cable or Apocalypse, and vice versa, based on different playstyles or what nodes opponents have, and so on and so forth. And Cable, you know, undeniably right now is a very, very powerful champion. It's one thing if you have Apocalypse solo and bring Apocalypse on your team, but much more often than that, people genuinely seek to bring in both of them together, because you make a very powerful champion even more powerful, and you synergize it with somebody that's also extremely, extremely powerful. And we can definitely see both of them use plenty. Therefore, I couldn't place Cable any higher, realistically, but this is where I feel he belongs. I think it is important to have Cable ranked if you have ranked up Apocalypse. I genuinely believe that. And I genuinely believe that once you synergize Cable with Apocalypse, you know, he is this powerful. It is an obvious downside that it's pointless to deny. There are plenty, but, well, again, plenty of other champions with similar downsides who made to these lists, and I think just because he's as synergy reliant as he is, shouldn't disqualify him. So I'm putting in Cable, spot number 6. Now let's move on to top 5 mutants. And top 5 mutants, again, people, like, no matter what I do, no matter how I place them, people will flip their bitch switch. Which, you know, is always welcome as long as you can do it, you know, moderately, decently. Right, and in spot number 5, I'm going to be placing in Professor X. Professor X, again, is one of those champions that's not necessarily everybody's cup of tea, because he does have a fairly peculiar playstyle. There are, some downsides to Professor X, but there are plenty of upsides. Now, let's start with his own innate, natural abilities, obviously. And he has potential for close to an infinite ramp-up, right? He genuinely does have potential for close to an infinite ramp-up, which can make his damage output just insane. That special spamming cycle, once you get into it, can be used and abused in a number of ways. Like, in Act 7, I quite frequently found myself just, saving some 2-3 pots where I knew I will want to use Professor X and just dropping on mutant power boosts and just nuking down entire lanes. On top of that, whenever you find nodes like Power Reserve, for instance, you basically can infinitely spam special attacks. And there are some other nodes that, increase your power gain, which let you do similar things. So Professor X can benefit from all of that stuff that relieves the way you can throw special attacks to just absolutely nuke down the opponent. On top of that, he bypasses miss and evade very, very, very efficiently. He's one of the better miss and evade counters, which obviously, again, is still a very sought-out ability to have. Now, moving forward, he has very reliable falter that you can use in more tricky fights to have an easy opening on opponent. And that ability to have an easy opening or intercept on demand is very handy. It's very important to counter nodes like Ebb and Flow Intercept and plenty of others, or if the opponent is stun immune, for instance, you can still frequently, regularly throughout the fight, find very safe openings with no need to take block damage or no need to intercept. And all of that can be used defensively as a, safeguard for when you mess up. And obviously it can be used offensively when you are absolutely nuking everybody down. Now, he's also immune to reverse controls, which is becoming slightly more common, but still a very rare ability. And, Kabam just loves including reverse controls in some crazy boss fights or just to mess with you. And the last thing that is very good about Professor X is that almost all of his attacks are projectiles. And with that, you are able to counter, Korgs or any other nodes or champions that deal damage to you when you make contact with them, especially in combination with that falter debuff, which allows you to start a combo with a light, for instance. And yeah, so he definitely puts in plenty of work. Right, now we need to address his synergies. Obviously, his synergies are also extremely handy and helpful. Now, unfortunately, there is a biggest irony in all of them, that he has a potential to make an entire mutant class extremely Liquid Courage double-edge friendly. But he himself is arguably one of the most Liquid Courage double-edge unfriendly champions. Therefore, we haven't seen as big of a reliance on this synergy, so far. It's very cool when you do the setup for like a labyrinth path or abyss path, but in generic content, you don't really see it being used too much. Largely because of this reason, and partially also because an average quest path now is 6 fights long. If we used to have an Act 6 quest where we have like 10-12 fights on a path, we don't get that too often anymore, outside of like Abyss and stuff. But as soon as mastery presets come, though, I do expect this synergy to become so much more important. And I do expect it to give such a big boost in usability to mutant champions. That's not even going to be funny anymore. Right, obviously then he increases special attack to all mutant champions, which is super helpful because a lot of mutants have crazy good special attacks. And then, rest of his synergies are also quite nice, giving you extra power gain or increasing the promise effect duration or what have you. A lot of good stuff there in synergies. So I think he was well deserving of 5th spot. The reason he's not higher is just because he's competing against an absolute monster crew. Let's go to spot number 4. and that is Magneto. And the thing with Magneto is, and I'm going to be absolutely candid, yesterday somebody asked me a question, which is an insanely amazing champion that you hate using? And for me, it's Magneto. I rely on him, I use him, because there's nobody better at what he does, but he's never a champion I kind of casually want to, I don't know. He's not a champion that I'm going to put on my team and start clearing entire quest paths. He's a champion that I will use when the fight's going to be tricky or hard, or, you know, he's the best needed option. It's still quite ridiculous how many of Act 6 and Act 7 boss fights he can absolutely cheese. You can see Kabam put on like 10 nodes on a boss and he just switches all of them off, and the fight ends up being parry heavy, parry heavy, parry heavy, level 3, dead. And that is it. You know, again, I think that Magneto House of X is better in non-metal matchups. But when you go up against metal matchups, hardly anything can withstand this guy. 70% ability accuracy reduction, completely nuke down the regeneration, can't miss against metal champions, you have 50% perfect block chance, you have increased attack rating, you have extra damage on heavy attacks, can't be auto-blocked either, wonderful, you know. It's just so crazy. Whenever you use Magneto, you feel that power. When you drop that level 3 with like 40 plus prowesses, you feel that power. You pretty much one-shot almost everything with a single level 3. And that is what Magneto is. It's undeniably amazing. It's undeniably great. It's undeniably uncool to play, I'd say. I genuinely don't enjoy using him, but he's that good, you know. And obviously, he does have some quite awesome synergies as well with many different champions. When it comes to his own synergies, he kind of saves all of them for himself. None of them can be used to enhance other champions. But he fits together neatly with plenty of other champions to enhance them, even with Kitty Pryde. Even with Kitty Pryde. But yeah, Magneto is just that good. So he's in spot number 4. Spot number 3, and that's Archangel. Because Archangel arguably does the same thing that Magneto does, where if he works for a matchup, it just works. And you nuke them down. And in the last mutant placement video, I actually placed him in the first place. And since then, I have not decreased my opinion about him at all. One champion has overtaken him in his use because his utilities at this point, I think, are undeniable. And then there's just a new champion on the list altogether. All that being said, I still look at Archangel as like one of the best champions in the game, period. I think Archangel is that good. I often run my 6-star, rank 3, and 5-star. And he's very simple. He's very, very simple. If opponent bleeds and can be poisoned, they can die extremely quick and painful death, with having no ability to heal, with having pretty much no ability accuracy, and you know, you're going to be bypassing majority of the abilities that hinder your damage. Some of the cooler things is also the fact that even if opponents mitigate bleed damage or are like partially bleed or poison resistant, you know, neurotoxin, nobody's necessarily immune to damage from neurotoxins or that passive damage pretty much. So even if you're going up against Diablo, or let's say even better, if you're going up against Immortal Abomination, you know, they just end up helping you. They might not take the poison damage, but, you know, they're going to take the neurotoxin damage, and they're just going to help you get where you're going faster. And, you know, he's very old champion at this point in the game. And I think initially after his release, his use kind of steadily declined for a moment because there were more and more champions that he didn't work on. And at that time, we had more of a mindset that we wanted champions that work as often as possible. The more this game has grown, the more value we are putting in champions that might not work in every single scenario, but that work the best when they do. And Archangel has benefited from that directly a ton. On top of that, Obviously, with the game evolving, there are more champions that he does work because more and more champions get released every single month. And since Archangel's release, immunities like, I don't know, armor break immunity, shock immunity, incinerate immunity, all that other stuff has become more, popular, potent, and not as many champions necessarily got pumped out that had the bleed or poison immunities inherent to them. So yeah, I think just Archangel is an absolute monster. Haven't lost a shred of confidence in this champion at all. I think as long as this game exists, he's going to be one of the most powerful characters in it, because he just works so... There is elegance and simplicity the way you play Archangel. That's, I think, is the best way to kind of describe it. And when you get to use Archangel, you understand that it's different. It's amazing. It's broken. And here we are. Right, now spot number 2, and I know somebody's going to argue because, Kitty Pryde has stirred a lot of chaos in the game, and I'm sure there will be people who would demand placing her first, and perhaps she will be, eventually. I think she still has, work to do, but I can't deny the fact that, she has started on it. And again, I have spoken with Kitty Pryde already in one of the previous video about 2021 champions released, and there is a ton of abilities, and I think the one that creates problems, or likely will create problems in future, is the ability of increased power gain from her signature. I wish she didn't have this, because what this ability does is make her obviously significantly more annoying on defense, because you can't really counter her with miscounters. So you can't, really human torch her easily, or you can't, use Professor X and so forth. So this makes her significantly trickier to counter on defense. Obviously, there are still counters. It's just that it reduces the amount of counters. But also on top of that, this enables her to, be a cheese god whenever true focus appears, or any champion that can bypass miss. Kind of wish she didn't have this. Obviously, it does make her more powerful for champion. I think this might have been the one thing that I wish wasn't there, for like the sake of, balance or my own mental health. Either way. Everything else with her ability kit is kind of fun, and I suspect we're going to get more and more champions in the game added that, remove prowess, and then she's going to get easier and easier to control. Currently, the most popular way to control her is just use a champion that never lands a crit, and then you just, pretty much never parry her, never crit her. She's not going to gain any prowess effects, and you're going to be fine. There is Nimrod, who inflicts cowardice, and that removes all prowess effects from Kitty, so Nimrod is a direct counter to her. On top of that, we have Psycho Man, who has cowardice, and we have War Machine, and we have Howard the Duck, who can also remove prowess effects. So they are very effective. But when it comes to Kitty Pryde, she has plenty of abilities, Some of them are centered around Incinerate and making her prowesses more potent, and, there are extra things that she can do, like refresh her Incinerates, but she's actually a very, very, very simple champion in a sense. While she's phased, if she's awakened, she takes no damage. Obviously, she can't be hit, and that's kind of the key of it. And then everything else revolves around, getting in the crits, getting the prowesses, and making sure that you can phase. And everything that's broken about or crazy good about Kitty Pryde comes out of the fact that you can spend a lot of time phasing, because you enter a phase every time you dash forward, and whenever you phased, you take no damage. And that is, what effectively makes a champion. So very simple idea wrapped in a ton of text and ton of extra abilities. And the balancing thing about Kitty Pryde, why I don't see too much issues with her at the moment, is obviously the fact that she is quite reliant, at the very least, on the Tiger synergy, where you do want to make sure that you can become passively unblockable to kind of freely rain on the opponents. But ideally, you also want to have Ghost Energy that gains you additional prowesses. everything put together, it's crazy good. I can see her, you know, taking over more and more content. And she's going to be one of those champions where there will be people who will not be using her and will be annoyed by her all the time. And there will be people who will be absolutely in love, destroying content. Great champion. Really powerful champion. And it's going to be interesting to see what kind of impact she exactly has on the game once a bit more time passes. Right. And now let's talk about champions that I'm placing in spot number 1. Spot number 1 is going to be Apocalypse at the moment. Because all the theory aside, everything else aside, he is pretty much the most clutch mutant, I will say. You know, large amount of his abilities aren't like anything all that special. But there are some things about him that, you know, just work when other champions don't. Rest of his base kit is fine, you know, bleeds on heavy attacks, you know, that's neat. Access to bleed, that's helpful. You know, access to weakness and poison and degen and concussion, all of those things are cool. You know, helpful, plenty of damage as well. And I'm not even going to talk about that ability to make Horseman of Apocalypse, because I genuinely largely look at this as gimmick. If I use Apocalypse in 20 quests, I make somebody Horseman maybe once, maybe for a boss fight or something. Because for vast majority of the time in a casual quest, you're just better off keeping the charges and keeping Apocalypse, you know, at his most powerful. You know, sometimes, yeah, I do make somebody a Horseman, but it's kind of like a win more situation typically as well. And, you know, it's not like that important to make somebody a Horseman, in my opinion. And yeah, it's a neat thing to do for a flashy video or, you know, win more scenario, but I just don't. I personally hardly ever make any champions Horseman when I use Apocalypse. Maybe it's different for you. But all of his other abilities just add up to, you know, a very solid powerhouse. What takes him over the edge, though? The two abilities that take him over the edge, I would say. The first one is that his debuffs don't get purified. You give opponent 100% purify ability accuracy reduction. And that has become so clutch. That is also 100% the reason why he was the only champion pretty much, or one of the very few champions that was able to take down that busted variant 8 Venom Pool without even being meant to be used in variant 8. But that is just really clutch. Again, with more and more champions being, you know, able to purify things and more nodes being used, like, you know, all the power snacks and masochism still being everywhere, and there's just plenty of that ability specifically flying everywhere. And when opponents can't purify anything, bingo, you know, you make fights so much more easy. So that is one massive thing. And the second massive thing right now, which I was kind of debating about top three spots, which one I want to place the highest. But the one thing that I decided, and for some people it might seem silly, but the one thing that mattered perhaps the most to me was the disorient immunity. And, you know, bleed immunity works fine when you run Liquid Courage Double Edge. You know, you automatically go bleed immune at the beginning of the fight, and, you know, that's basically like having a full-on proper immunity. Then we have Incinerate immunity, which you benefit from significantly less, because half of the time, if you have Incinerate on you, if it's competitive content, you know, you're not going to be able to withstand it for 8 seconds before losing like 80% of your health. But Disorient is different, because Disorient doesn't do any damage to you directly. So whenever you deal with Disorient heavy matchups, you know, you just automatically go Disorient immune without taking any additional damage. And having Disorient for 8 seconds is not a big ask. So he's almost, again, pretty much entirely Disorient immune. And he's also the only champion in the game that has Disorient immunity. there would be more champions that are immune to disorient, but they're not because Kabam's cheeky and disorient has 2 abilities. One of the abilities is, you reduce defensive ability accuracy, and the other ability is you reduce block proficiency. There is not a single champion that's immune to both effects, therefore nobody else in the game is immune to disorient. And that adds so much value given the fact that Kabam just shits disorient these days. If you take a look at 7.3, I think you can probably find a disorient lane or two in like every quest. Now, disorient is ever so potent in AQ map 8 now. Disorient is in Alliance Wars now added extra, and it's just everywhere. And just absolutely everywhere. And on top of being this incredibly powerful mutant as is, he also happens to be literally the only champion in the game that's immune to disorient. And that gives him even more value. That's very hard to deny. So many times in Act 7, I just brought in Apocalypse because of the sole and only reason he was disorient immune, and he made several parts much easier. Like, which one of us doesn't hate those nodes when you parry, you get disoriented, or you dash back twice, you get disoriented, or when opponent looks at you the wrong way, you get disoriented. It's just so much of that stupid debuff going around the game right now that it's incredible piece of utility to be immune to that. Because it's not just the disorient that you fight against, because the disorient debuff is often also incorporated with different nodes. For instance, if the opponent is debuffed, all of a sudden attacker goes unblockable and things like that. Apocalypse can just, shut that shit off at the very core. And obviously then there is everything else that I mentioned about Apocalypse and his own synergies with plenty of different champions, like Cable. He makes Cable an insanely good champion. He makes Archangel better. He makes Storm Pyramid X better. He makes Gambit an absolute blocking powerhouse. All that other good stuff also matters. Obviously it does. So, altogether, I think Apocalypse has proved himself as currently the most valuable mutant. And again, all of these rankings are subject to change. Game trains will change. And, new champions will be added, and perhaps the need for Apocalypse will be reduced. But right now, this is how I see them. So, I'm going to list all of the champions that I mentioned in the video again one more time. And that's it. Let me know what you guys think. So, spot number 10, White Magneto. Spot number 9, Namor. Spot number 8, Omega Red. Spot number 7, Colossus. Spot number 6, Cable. Spot number 5, Professor X. Spot number 4, Magneto. Spot number 3, Archangel. Spot number 2, Kitty Pryde. Spot number 1, APOC. Let me know what you guys think. Catch you guys soon. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about